Tamar, given what you just heard from Michael Kugelman, how do you then de-escalate? The worry is that the hospital strike, you reiterate that this was a Islamic Jihad missile that was misfired, and therefore Hamas and groups like Hamas must take accountability. But unless you're able to convince the wider world, including the United Nations, how do you de-escalate tensions given that tensions are rising across the region? Is that a worry, a concern at the moment?
You know what would de-escalate tensions? If 800 terrorists didn't storm the Gaza-Israel border, go from home to home, start murdering families in their homes, decapitating babies, burning babies alive, tying parents and children together and burning them alive as they hugged. So I don't want to talk about de-escalation at the moment. I want people to hold Hamas responsible for who they are. They are nothing less than ISIS terrorists, and I think it's an embarrassment that not everybody is referring to them as that.
So are you saying that there is absolutely no possibility either of ending the siege or indeed of stopping these rocket attacks from Israel, given the fact that this is a very densely populated area, given the fact that there are civilians who are becoming more and more casualties of what's happening? What happened on October 7th is horrific, was a terrible terror attack, and our sympathies and solidarity with the people of Israel for what happened. But what's happening now is a humanitarian crisis of also very deep, of very great proportion. So how is Israel seeing that? Does Israel see this as a humanitarian tragedy unfolding in Gaza or not?
So first of all, we want to protect every single civilian life that we can protect. We take protecting civilian lives extremely seriously. Not enough people are talking about the humanitarian crisis in Gaza that's being caused by Hamas. If you look at reports, in recent days, we put out a message from the IDF where we literally flew in hundreds of flyers telling Gazans to move from northern Gaza into southern Gaza so that they would be safe from Israeli strikes. And what happened? Hamas went around Gaza, putting up roadblocks, preventing people from leaving, from the north to the south. And in addition to that, yesterday is just another example of the fact that Hamas hides behind innocent civilians in Gaza. They use schools, hospitals, community centers to launch rockets, and they should be held responsible for the humanitarian crisis currently taking place in Gaza.
But, there is another crisis also which is brewing, which is the hostage crisis. Is there a sense, Tamar, that unless the hostages, are released by Hamas, will there be negotiations with Hamas? This is a question I've been asking several Israeli guests over the last few days. Are you willing to negotiate with the hostage takers given the anger that exists in your country at the moment, or is that not on the negotiating table at all?
So I don't want to comment on potential negotiations. All I want to say is we are going to do everything in our power to bring the hostages home. I also want to take this opportunity to send a message to the hostages and their families. We love you. We support you. We are working around the clock to bring you home. And I also want to make very, very clear that every single Hamas official who is responsible for harming Israelis will be held accountable. We are going to find them, and we are going to make sure that they pay for their actions.
But will the U.S., this is to Michael Kugelman, Mr. Kugelman, will the U.S. be able to lean on countries like Qatar, where many of the Hamas leaders are based, to push Hamas at least to release the hostages? Is that at least the very minimal that the U.S. hopes to achieve from Mr. Biden's visit to the region?
I think your question was about the hostages. I would argue that perhaps one reason why Israel has not yet begun the ground operations, the ground invasion that it has pledged to do, is because of concerns about the impacts that could have on the hostages. And this is why the hostage issue is one of the biggest priorities, certainly for the U.S., but for Israel and for other actors in the region as well. Qatar is in an interesting place here in the sense that you do have several senior Hamas leaders who are based in Qatar. But at the same time, Qatar is a critical player in this story, and it does have the capacity to play the role of a mediator, including on trying to get these hostages freed. I think we need to be watching Qatar and see how it carries out its policies in the coming days. But indeed, so far as I understand, you still have women and children that are hostages among them. This, in my view, has to be one of the top priorities. along with getting aid to those in Gaza. I mean, forget about the issue of wrapping up the war. Unfortunately, the war is not going to wrap up anytime soon. The focus clearly will need to be on these humanitarian issues, the aid issues, and also the plight of the hostages being held by Hamas.
So we've got the plight of the hostages on one side. We've got the need to ensure humanitarian aid reaches those who are suffering in Gaza and Palestine. And we've got the anger and outrage in Israel. Tamar, is there a sense in Israel that there are Palestinian lives also now being lost? A sense of, is this now about revenge above all else? That what happened on October 7th must be avenged by ensuring not just Hamas, but the Palestinian people suffer in a way. There are a lot of critics who are saying you cannot allow collective punishment. These are not my words. These are the words of the UN Secretary General, who said this cannot be a moment for collective punishment of an entire people. You can destroy Hamas. You cannot target an entire people.
Look, this isn't about revenge. This is about ensuring that the state of Israel is not wiped off the map as Hamas would like to do. I have to tell you that at the moment, if you speak to Israelis, every single Israeli currently knows someone who is either murdered, kidnapped, raped, tortured, or who is missing. Our paramount goal is to bring the hostages home and ensure that Israelis can live in peace and dignity. What we've seen in the past week, and I have to say this as somebody who has grandparents who were Holocaust survivors, some of the images we've seen of children being burned alive are reminiscent of what my ancestors experienced in the Holocaust. And when we say never again, we really mean never again. We are not going to allow anyone to injure or harm our civilians.